back to Bread and Butter, everybody. We are the Hearthstone podcast where we serve the basics that the average Hearthstone player needs to improve their game. This week, we have another very special returning guest, Edelweiss. Edelweiss, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well, thank you.
And Tito, how about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic, and I think you came up with a pretty creative name for this episode. What did you think, Doc?
Edel-Thrice.
This is Edelweiss's third appearance on our show, so Edel-Thrice seems to work out pretty well. So, Edel, new expansion, been out for about a week now. What have you been doing in the world of Hearthstone?
Oh gosh, what have I not been doing? It's, this is the time when it's hardest for me to try and balance Hearthstone and sleep and food and work and, just all the things. Didn't help that taxes were around this time as well. So
don't worry, that'll all be decided for you in about 5 months or so when your sleep comes whenever you can get it.
Yeah, well, the plan is to just, sort of pat them over the shoulder while I, play some games on my tablet or whatever. So regardless, for now, been having a ton of fun with Festival of Legends, and I recently posted a list that I think is my best one of the expansion so far, and that is a secret mage. So very proud of that one. I had something stupid like an 80% win rate.
Jeez.
I'm currently looking for THL decks, so maybe I'll steal that from you. How about yourself, Doc? What have you been playing?
I've been playing a lot of... there's a cattail. I've been playing a lot of Big Beast Hunter and Mech Mage. I've tried the Outcast Aggro Demon Hunter. Don't really like it that much. It's just not my style of deck to play. Big Beast Hunter was a lot of fun in the first 2 days, but it's just way too slow and to deal with the aggressive decks, and then when it comes to the control decks, there's just unlimited removal, it feels like. So I just switched to Mech Mage because I either win in 6 turns or I lose, and I just move on to the next game.
So you're saying your big dreams aren't coming true?
No, unfortunately, it's pretty realistic. So outside of Hearthstone, Edelweiss, have you been up to anything fun?
If taxes are fun, no, not really. Just been working on that stuff and then Passover things as well. So very, very busy past week with all that going on. But hoping to start having some more fun besides Hearthstone in the upcoming weeks.
I hope you don't mind, Doc, but I would like to talk about my Hearthstone games.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that, Tito. What have you been doing inside Hearthstone, Tito?
Well, I tried... So last month, we talked about I hit the 11 stars. I had a really good rank. This month I came in at Legend. I was at 176. I was super excited, and I was like, all right, but I'm still going to play what I want to play. I'm going to try to experiment. I'm going to not look at my rank as much, and then I completely tank my rank playing things like Disco Paladin, which I love, and I hope that we can make it work at some point, but not quite there yet. I have been playing... I tried to capture... I've been starting to work on some of the editing things. I did... we'll talk about that afterwards, but I was trying... I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try to capture a YouTube moment early in the expansion, so I tried to chase Outcast Demon Hunter Tony combo, where you equip the weapon, you play a metric ton of Outcast cards, you play Tony, you swing with the weapon, you draw their deck. Didn't nail it.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it was something that was going to be... I was looking for a YouTube clip. I was looking for my Marky Mark moment. I was trying to get there. Didn't quite work out. But it was like, I had the idea. I said, what if we could just get all the cards and then switch the decks and do that? And it just kind of failed. But I've recently started switching back to decks I'm familiar with. I had a good winning percentage a couple days. I started getting to the point where I'm starting to play Diamond People again in Legend, so I didn't like that. So I started playing Shadow Priest again, which is really good. And I've actually kind of started drifting towards the new Shadow Priest, which is Shadow Attendants, and the one that shoots 5 damage if you draw it undead, and it's got eggs, and it's got the Mind Eaters, and it's a lot more low to the ground, aggressive, more minion based deck, and it's been a lot of fun. It's good against both those decks are good against Blood DK, which we'll talk about later. But it's been a real lot of fun. So I'm not sure it's good, but I'm still trying to figure out. I'm starting my first THL, my second THL season. I did one in Wild, but this is my first one in Standard, and I'm apparently playing against people like Naja Boston this week. So that'll be fun. I'm trying to not embarrass myself, I would say. So, but Doc, what have you been doing outside in the world of Hearthstone?
Well, so this isn't something I've done, but I've just been hyping up my my 14-year-old cousin. She took first in her bell racing open in Redmond, Oregon, in the open division, her age group, the over under average, and the overall average. She also won the Yeti Las Vegas World Junior Championships back in August, and then she has another qualifier in Heber City, Utah, that she's going to next week. And my family and her parents weren't horse people, but she got really into horses, and she's a fantastic barrel racer. So I've just been hyping her up and cheering her on as she's been just being really good at the things she does. Yeah, it's just cool to see people you care about succeed at something so greatly. Yeah, so just hyping up my cousin. Nothing special on my end.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And
we already did me, so what about you?
fair enough. I've been working on editing. I've edited the podcast the last couple weeks, so that's been kind of fun and challenging. I found out the wonderful thing of Alt Control Shift D, which mutes things like accidental overtalks and dog barking and all kinds of fun stuff. So it's almost it's power that I didn't know I needed and I wanted, but it has been a beautiful thing editing. I also have been working with some videos. We had a running gag with our last fight night that me and Dawn did, where we had Blister Guy versus Just a Guy, and one of the things was that Steven, Just a Guy, kept taking bears in the last, all through the night, but especially in the last matchup. And it became kind of a running joke of Daniel's complaint, because it was Daniel's deck. It's like, why does he keep taking the bears? The deck was better than that, but he kept taking the bears. So I made a video that took a song and just kind of because I had the thought of Bears beats Battlestar Galactica. So I took Jim and Dwight talking, and I started it off with that. And I'll throw it to you later, Edelweiss. It's only a minute and a half. You might enjoy it. But I was able to put in clips with him talking with Blister Guy, and he's Blister Guy's like, oh, you have a bear? He's like, I have 3 bears. That's too many bears. It was great. So, but it was mostly I want to learn how to do some editing, because I'm working on the Journey to 11 project that we talked about, and I wanted to make the music that went with it and all that. So it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. But since we're talking about that real quick, we have in 2 weeks, or just under 2 weeks, so 4/29, April 29th at 10 p.m. on my Twitch, we have our 3rd fight night. And that'll be with Edelweiss versus Warshak. And we have a special twist in this case, which is they're going to do the same thing that Just a Guy and Blister Guy did, where they're going to draft per the submitters. And our submitters are Ridiculous Hat, Deck Tech, Ron Mexico, I got his name right. Who else we got? We have Nick Bannerface, we have Ridiculous Hat, and did I say Deck Tech already?
You said hat already.
And hat.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we have
You're good.
we have great submitters, and what's going to happen is they're submitting 15 cards. And those 15 cards are going to be the idea of a deck. You know how you have an idea and you're like, I think I know how this deck's going to work. So you come up with an idea, but then it's like, how do you fulfill that idea? It's like, well, what if I take this card and this card? You mix them together and I can do that. So what we're doing is our great contributors will give us the half of the deck, the idea of the deck, and then it's going to be Warshack and Edelweiss's job to complete the deck. And with their so they'll have I think we said 15 minutes per deck, where they'll take what. I mean, we can do more. We can figure out how it is.
We'll see. It should be fine.
We're still negotiating that, but they have time to figure out how they're going to take this deck and make it a reality and say, okay, how do I make this from an idea into something else? And then they're going to battle. They're not going to be able to see the decks that they pick. They're going to say, I'll take Ridiculous Hat. And Ridiculous Hat's going to say, okay, here's your pirate, rogue, whatever, because that's what he does. So it'll be fun. I'm sorry, Wicked Good's also contributing, and Blister Guy. So those are the other two.
So I shouldn't pick Priest. That's okay.
I don't know. Maybe Wicked Good didn't pick Priest. Who knows? Stranger things have happened. It's more likely that he didn't pick Priest than, like, say, Sidisi didn't pick Hunter if he was contributing. So, so what do you think about the event there, Edel? Like, any thoughts early on? I know it's kind of a new concept and idea.
Well, as long as I'm not being actively sabotaged, I feel pretty confident going in, particularly with this expansion, at least for my personal play. I've had some really solid beginnings. I had a Death Rattle Druid that, for no good reason, had pretty absurd win rate, been doing well with, the Secret Mage I mentioned, and I still think I have the most passable Light Show Mage as well. And most recently, I have come up with a 30-card Blood Decay that just kills people with Rag and Alex instead of dirtling around for, a million turns.
Nice. Ben Heastone actually created a deck on our last one. I don't know if you saw this. He created a Reno Druid. But the Reno Druid had 2 squirrels. So what you had to do was get 1 squirrel, but not play it and let it get killed in order to have your Reno active.
That's so mean.
But it's funny because his whole thing is
what I'm saying about active sabotage, that's what I mean.
And I talked to Ray after the match, and he didn't realize that because he remembered at the very end, he's like, oh, there are 2 squirrels, but he didn't remember that if he played it, those squirrels would be in his deck, deactivating his Reno. So I thought that was pretty. I mean, yes, it was active sabotage, but it was, I think, clever sabotage.
That is true.
So anyway, we've had Edel-Thrice. And we've interviewed her already. So you know who she is. She's fantastic. We all know this. That's why she's back. But we figured, what do we do in the section where we interview people? Because we don't want to interview her again. You know her. So we're going to try something a little different. We'll see how it works. And we created a little game called Diamonds in the Rough. And what this is going to be is we're going to throw cards her way. And we're going to say, these are a card that is either not being played right now in the meta, or maybe is not necessarily having much success in the meta, and just get a rough idea of how she would approach building that deck. And we're not looking for meta breakers here. We're just this is not a test. There will be no thing. But we're looking to have some fun, and maybe it'll spark some ideas in some of our listeners saying, hey, yeah, that sounds like a really fun deck, or maybe it'll even spark an idea in us. So, Doc, do you happen to have the list?
Yeah, so our first card, Edel, is the Druid legendary spell, Rhythm and Roots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all...
Before we go, can you read the card, Doc?
Yeah.
So
for those of you that don't know what this card does, it's choose one secretly, summon 3 5/5 ancients in 2 turns, or 8/8 giants in 4 turns.
And it's a legendary, so you only get one of in a deck.
Right. Yeah, this was seeing some play early on and then just fell out because that's not the way the Druids have really been going. But in terms of something that would appreciate that, I feel like some kind of, board-based where you want to go wide and just stick something you can guarantee targets. In particular with Drum Circle, where you give your minions +2/+4 and taunt. This could be a way to kind of make sure you're going to have a board and at least those 3 5/5s so that you can Drum Circle and get a pretty massive wall of taunts. 7/9s are pretty good when they have taunts. So that would be the direction I would go. I even thought that you could do this with, a form of using those hero power minions and Unending Swarm and just kind of do it like, instead of trying to get a bunch of value out of your hero power, just using the hero power buff as burst. And so Rhythm and Roots could kind of fit in there in terms of just making sure you have board after board after board, just like your good old, aggro druid, where you go wide, and then as soon as a board sticks, you play your board buffs.
Okay, so now that we have an idea, do you think it would be viable?
I think it would be tough with, like, Frost Decay. You might have enough boards against Blood. But the trick would be getting, like, the draw engine correct. There are some pretty good draw spells available for Druid right now, so that might be fine. But it'd probably be, like, low tier 2, high tier 3.
That's not bad. All right, Doc. What's our next card?
Yeah, so our next card is DJ Manastorm, which is the 10 mana mage legendary with 8 attack, 8 health. Battlecry. Set the cost of spells in your hand to 0. After you cast one, the others cost 1 more.
Should give Funky this question. I imagine there will be more big spells in future to go with this. But the most obvious currently is just to have a bunch of Pyroblasts. And yeah, so Pyroblasts, and particularly if you can get extra copies, whether that's a snapshot from Fizzle, or, maybe you cast one of them and then use rewinds to get more, or Savara to get more, or just you have your 2 Pyroblasts and then some Firelands portals and Fireballs, just all the burn. You could then use Millhouse to throw all that stuff face. I think often you're going to be like playing Millhouse and either doing an Alibi or a Blizzard if you have to be defensive, since you won't be able to do all the others on the same turn. But another option that I gotta say I have to attribute Funky for this, if you use Bone Whisper, then you just make Millhouse free, and you don't have to wait a turn. You can just play the Millhouse for 0 and then do your crazy pop-off spell turn.
I lost to that deck. I was, what are they? I saw the Bone Whisper come down. I was like, what the hell are we doing? I didn't even think Millhouse. Yeah, I was like, all right. And I cleared one turn. I cleared another turn. And I'm like, all right, we got them. I had a really nice board. I had everything. And it was Millhouse, Pyroblast, dead.
Yeah, it's a lot of damage. I think you get, you get the 0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So you get basically 5 spells in that single turn. So if it's all burn,
so there's really not like, so basically Millhouse is kind of the only way to build it is to kind of build it with the big things, and like it'd be kind of cool if you could do something like with like the skeletons or something like that, but it's just not there. Or there's only spells, right? Yeah,
the tricky thing is, no matter what the original cost of the spells was, all your spells that were affected by the Millhouse buff increase by 1 every time you cast a spell. So you're really not served having cheaper spells in the deck. And I wouldn't be surprised if later on we get other big spells maybe that don't just kill you, because that might be more direct damage than they're wanting to put out there. But, something like Millhouse into the Summon Dragon spell, right? That would be a good first turn. And then if you just successively are able to do something like Blizzard and, make more big minions, I think stuff like that could be interesting.
And I believe I could hear Hat saying in the back of my ear, why would you do that when you just send 2 Pyroblast face?
Well, that's not always enough damage, as we've seen.
Unless you're going up against Blood Decay, which we'll talk about later. Doc, what is our next card?
So our next card is a 6 mana 4/2 Paladin rare card, Lead Dancer, Death Rattle. Summon a minion from your deck with a less attack than this minion.
So I want to say on this, I've played this deck. I played the deck with Kangor. It is super fun. But this card feels too slow, and all it gets you is a Noyo Troop. So that doesn't seem like... I mean, that seems like what they kind of want you to think about, but there's got to be something else you can
Wait,
do with this.
what do you mean all it gets you is a Noya Troop? There's like 6 minions it gets you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, of course, Kangor, right? That's the obvious one, because 3 attack or less. There's a Noya Troop, again, obvious. But Mishmash Mosher is also really solid for that deck, because they pull it out and that's a clear. Whether it's off of Kangor or off of that, I think it's a pretty solid recruit. If you really want to make sure you have high enough density, Red Herring is a 3/12 taunt, so it's a lot of stats. If you just want something to hold the line until you can pop down your other big threats. In theory crafting, I actually was up against Baby Bear with this deck list. She was playing like a hand buff. Blood, like double blood, 1 unholy deck, and I just ran her out of stuff because I kept having these massive threats coming down. And what I think is interesting about the card is you can have certain things that don't get pulled from Lead Dancer, but can still get pulled from Kangor if that's what you want. Whether that's like an augmented Elic or something else.
Do you think that there's potential there to have a hand buff deck that takes advantage of by buffing your Lead Dancer to get bigger things out, or is that kind of like it already feels like it's too slow when I've played with it, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's the current meta, but it felt like it was too slow. But if you could buff it and then draw out bigger things, is there potential there?
So I think Paladin had pretty much all of its hand buff rotate, except for the one Gadgetson dude, which that's sort of a nombo already because the minion itself is a 2/2. So I don't know that there's really hand buff for Paladin in that way right now. Maybe down the line there will be something. What I think is more likely is they'll print additional 3 attack minions that are large or have other powerful effects that will be worth recruiting, and like that's a way that you can sort of add more to that deck.
Fair enough. I will say that so far, even though I did not have success with it, Kangor is easily my favorite card in the expansion so far. It is such a fun card. it just like it keeps bouncing back to your hand. You keep throwing down lifesteals. I really want that deck to be good, but it doesn't seem like it's taking off. At least not in its current iteration. Maybe after Blood DK gets a little bit of a hit, but we'll talk about that later. Doc, what's our next card?
Yeah, so our next card is everyone's favorite Jazz Trumpeteer, the 5-mana 5/5 from Shaman, Inza. Battle Cry. For the rest of the game, your overload cards cost 1 less.
This goes great with the quest, right? Oh, wait, sorry. Oops, never mind.
Yeah, no more quest. Rip Shaman quest. But Inza is pretty solid in general. I think the best thing he does is to make Pack the House come down on 6 instead of 7, because that is just a massive pile of stats. I think there's not quite enough overload cards for that sort of shaman to function right now. It's missing something. What I want to do is like a Wrathspine Naga deck where you're able to take advantage of Command of Neptulon, and if we had another fire overload clear spell, like that would fit well, but we lost the 5-mana one. And there's not too many frost spells right now either. It's pretty much just Cold Storage and the heal finale one. So I think currently there's not a ton, but one thing you definitely can do with Inza is to go for the Jive Insect plus make a bunch of copies. Yeah, criminal lineup. You might still need the weapon discount, but certainly Inza goes a long way there as well. My really out there idea, though, was to do like something with Melomania, and so even if you're not like running a ton of overloads, maybe you'd be generating some and they would be discounted. Very important to note, it doesn't just discount overload spells, it's just overload cards, so it's your minions too.
Very
There just
nice.
aren't a lot of those yet.
Shaman, actually, side note, Shaman feels kind of strong with, like, it feels like Totem Shaman is pretty strong. The rag deck, gimmicky, it kind of feels bad when you lose to it, but it doesn't feel quite as good. Is Totem Shaman good?
I think Totem Shaman's actually pretty solid. They make a ton of boards, and they have kind of that same feeling that Paladin sometimes does when they get all their light rays down. Like, Shaman just throws down Gigantotem and Thing from Below, and you've got a pile of stats out of nowhere, especially when they have that infused 1-mana spell, Totemic Evidence. And that's 1 mana for discounting 4. Pretty nutty for accelerating their game plan.
And if they get Eyesore down early, it's hard to you don't necessarily have a good clear for that right away. And if that can get a couple ticks off, that's their hand and deck. That's snowbally.
Yeah, or even just Totemic Evidence plus Rotgill, right? Like, they have some pretty tough boards to clear.
Fair enough. Doc, what are our last 2 cards? They kind of go together.
Yeah, so the last 2, I would think, kind of go together.
Maybe we're
But the
wrong.
first one is the Warlock spell, legendary spell, for 6 mana, Symphony of Sins, discover, and play a movement, shuffle the other 6 into your deck. And then the last one is the Warlock 5 mana, 5/6 legendary card, Rin, the Orchestrator of Doom, taunt, death rattle. Both players draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and destroy the top 2 cards of their deck.
These are the same class. I don't think they go together at all.
Oh, really? Okay, so how would you take each of those and do them? Because you kind of look at the symphonies, and it does feel like you could kind of combine, like, oh, you discard all the cards here, you can get the spell that discards all the cards, or something like that. So from someone that doesn't have a great deck building mind, you would look that they do kind of go together. But you're saying they don't, so please.
I mean, only one of the symphonies goes with that game plan, the mill 6 of the opponent's deck. I feel like the symphony, you more go just for having all these value options. Like, it's a lot of, apart from that first one where you're sort of paying for the discover, the other ones are 3 for a super powerful effect. I think Symphony is just kind of like a solid inclusion in a lot of lists. In aggressive lists, you can hit either the deal 6 to all or deal 6 lifesteal, and that can be good burst, plus some additional high value things that get shuffled in. And in slower stuff, you just do this, maybe for a clear, maybe for a taunt reborn. Like, it's not always incredible, but every time you pick up one of those later on, they can be pretty high impact. Especially, I've seen some of these lists with Thaddeus where you get the draw your highest cost minion and reduce its cost by 6, and that can lead to some pretty powerful swings. But for Rin, I feel like you have to be all in on the Ticketus life. And you want to run basically everything that has an effect when it gets discarded, so you can minimize like the disadvantages of discarding cards. With symmetrical effects, you want them to be better for you than for your opponent. So by running all those cards, then at least if you're discarding stuff and you're getting a 2/5 taunt, you're destroying a random enemy minion, all that kind of stuff. I think if there were a discard card that drew cards, that might be something. But of course, Hand of Gul'dan is in Wild. But presently, I think the only ways you can repeat the effect are if you maybe play it, and then when it dies, you can Habeas Corpses, bring it back, and maybe cover artist it while you've revived it. You could use the Shallow Grave on it to get extra instances of the Death Rattle, and so you'd sort of be all in on that effect and trying to discard things that still do stuff while you're doing this game plan and like burn your opponent's deck and make them discard stuff. It's just like maximum chaos disruption, which some people love, but you're really going to be living or dying by what things you hit.
I mean, it really feels like with Warlock that they are afraid to give them enough tools for discard or anything because of Wild. Because they give us little hints of things, but anytime they give us anything that's good, it breaks Wild. And I don't think they want to do that anymore. I don't think they want to have to reel back Wild or ban things from Wild because they gave us a support package for discard in Standard. But I think it's kind of like, I mean, if they had just said, okay, hey, in our core set, we're giving you Silverware Golem and Fist of Jaraxxus, I think we're cooking. I think we get a stew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with one or certainly both of those, then maybe you could build this Tunnel Vision deck where you've got Talon, Finds, Rin, and you're just like all in on that game plan. It would be super chaotic, but it would make for some great clips. But in terms of power level, I feel like I'm more on board with Symphony of Sins. And I'm actually thinking about putting it in a Fatigue Warlock deck that I built and have to keep refining. I actually killed a priest with that for crescendos of 17 and 18 damage. A control priest.
Wow, that's wow. I've played with the Fatigue cards. I've played with all these cards. How do you? Okay, this is a little bit of a side, but how do you manage your rank? You just kind of like because you want to not like tank your rank, right? You want to. I mean, maybe you don't care, but like if how do you balance that with finding the fun with all these cards? Because like I know, like I said, I started playing kinds of some weird decks. And I tanked my rank, and I went all the way from 174 to 7,350, whatever the heck I am right now. And it feels bad, even though I'm having fun not winning. It just feels bad because I feel like I'm throwing away all the hard work I did last month and the month before, and that. So how do you balance that? Because I'm struggling with that. I really am. I don't know how I balance losing by having fun, where I also have fun winning.
Well, I think one of the ways is a little bit of a mind trick, which is I did a ton of experimentation before I hit Legend, because it feels less bad to me when I'm in that, diamond to 1 space where, yeah, it's not great if I like was at 2 and then fell back to the floor, but I still have the confidence in myself that I know I'm going to get to Legend eventually, like once I try something meta. So not seeing the really high number helps me like not feel as bad, even though it's doing the same thing to my MMR, right? Like that's no different, but it kind of takes off some of the mental burden of like, oh no, I don't actually like going down to these big Legend numbers.
And so I may have made a mistake where I said, you know what, the new expansion's coming. I don't know how I'm going to do with these decks, so I'm going to hit Legend early. So I hit Legend day 2 or 3. I got in my decks. I have over 700 games with the old Shadow Priest, because that's what I was doing every stream. We were learning it. We were trying to find the matchups. We were doing the Lorenda thing that we're sticking with the deck until it drives us mad. But I was having a lot of fun. It didn't feel like sometimes you play a deck and it feels like. I'm like I need to switch, but like I wasn't feeling that. I was having fun. Every matchup seemed interesting, and now I'm just like, all right, how do I balance these two? Because I'm like sitting there now. I'm trying to, like I said, I'm trying to figure out my THL lineup. So I got to play with those decks, but I also want to try these other decks. But it also feels bad. So it's a real interesting conundrum. And I also the solution is play casual, but no, who wants to play casual? Like that doesn't feel right either.
Yeah, I've never done that because I always feel like, well, but if I run into other people trying wacky stuff, that's actually not good for me. I don't want data on how my decks perform against other crazy things. I want data on how my decks perform against the meta decks. So I want to be facing the more legitimate deck list to get good data. I basically balance it by when the number gets too high for my self-confidence, I just play something, really powerful for a little while and climb back up. But every once in a while, like with this mage, I just have a ridiculous win rate, and it's fine.
So talk
probably,
about that.
probably
Talk about the
refining
mage.
fatigue warlock is not going to go so well.
Hey, this is a little bonus section. Talk about the mage.
Yeah, so the mage, other people have not had that success, but mage basically came around because I like Orion, even though I know it is miserable to play against if you can deal with the secret. But it's really fun when they play something and it gets countered or objectioned or whatever, and Orion plays a new secret, and it's just like it's this really challenging thing to deal with, and I feel like he hasn't really gotten a ton of play in Standard. I know he's been making people miserable in Wild, and Volume Up is a heck of a card with Frozen Touch, because basically what I do is there's not a ton of spells. You've only got 6 secrets. So Volume Up, a decent amount of the time, gets you an extra copy of Frozen Touch. And 2 Frozen Touches in a very minion-heavy deck is considerable amount of persistent burst damage. So, and then the other thing that I really wanted to try, that honestly other people have been able to do with this deck and I still haven't, but I have Aegwynn in there, and her death rattle goes on the next minion you pick up. Well, if that minion is the ghoul that copies itself, it's a 2/5 taunt that copies itself if you control a secret, well, then they both have that death rattle, and now you've got +4 spell damage. So it's almost a build your own Malagos. And that, with Frozen Touches and with the, I've got the minions that give you arcane bolts, you can get some really heavy burst turns. And many times I end up killing Blood Decays because, I top deck the minion with the Aegwynn buff and just throw like 2 to 3 Frozen Touches and 4 arcane bolts, and it doesn't matter that they have a ton of life, they just took 30. So
But people don't take Frozen Touches. You know what they take? This is a game that killed my Paladin experience, and that's where I stopped playing it. I played against a mage who cast, I believe, 6 life sentences and 2 objections against me. So I played Kangar, life sentence. I played Lead Dancer, life sentence. It just was, and then so it's either the life sentences or the solid alibis. Sometimes solid alibis feels like you just stalling the inevitable, but man, is that card annoying to play against.
I'm not sure what they're including life sentence for. I mean, there are a few things that's good against, but I don't feel like it's a particularly meta breaker spell to be running right now. Solid alibi is definitely annoying, but as an aggressive deck, it's not in the Secret Mage.
Yeah, no, and I tried playing the so before we rotated, I said, you know what, I tried to get myself used to looking at my rank drop, so I said, you know what, we're gonna try to create something, and I tried to create this kind of hybrid Kel'Thuzad / Casino Mage deck that tried to really hone in on casting Deathborn and building up your skeleton package and getting the I had Aegwynn in there to really take advantage of those Deathborns to kill bigger things, and it was a lot of fun, but it just never got there. Kel'Thuzad feels like it should be a better card than it is, but like you run everything but Kel'Thuzad when you play Bone Zone Mage, and you can see why when you actually do it, but it feels like it should be there.
I may send you a list. I have definitely killed some Blood Decays with like 29 skeleton Kel'Thuzads. So
I want that and your Secret Mage. All right, so I think it's time for our main topic, Doc. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
Broccoli, broccoli, it's time to eat your broccoli.
So, Edel, we are now in the first week of the meta. We've already had a balance patch. Do we feel like the meta is solved and we're waiting for the real balance patch, or are we still evolving? And did the nerfs really matter at all?
Interesting. Well, I'm going to address that second part first, which is not terribly. I think the nerfs were more to kind of push down powerful cards from previous expansions, right? So it was Construct Quarter, Light Ray, and the Outcast payoff card, 5/5 Rush,
Wallaber.
which had previously been buffed from 7 to 6. So this was actually a reversion, not even a proper nerf. So all of those are older cards. Apart from the Outcast one, they're cards that we've seen a lot, right? Construct Quarter has been in every DK since it came out, so they're trying to reduce that play rate a bit. And the Light Ray has been similarly in pretty much every Paladin since it's been out. So I think just with those being the popular decks, they said, hey, we want people to be doing more of the new stuff. No, it didn't necessarily hit the win percentage of those decks that much, but it probably hit it a bit for the ranks where they were very oppressive. Everyone at top ranks was just like, oh, okay, this didn't matter. It didn't have an impact for, I think, majority of people in Legend, the balance.
Do you think that Construct Quarter needs a rune? Like, what if you gave it a green rune?
No, I think Construct Quarter is fine. At this point with 2 durability, you don't even always run it. I think it was a really solid card at 3 charges still, and it could feel oppressive if you were a board-based deck and you're like, well, I know every time this is online they have a hero power to make a 4/5, and that's a lot. But I do think once it went to 4 mana, it was no longer a mulligan keep, because 4 is pretty late. Certainly in the aggressive stuff, you shouldn't be keeping it. At this point, at 2 charges, it's not the insane value. I think it's definitely not a keep anymore.
All right. So is the meta solved? Do we feel like we know where we want everything's going, and we're waiting for the balance patch?
Look, I've only posted 1 deck to Twitter. There's no way it's solved. I made a secret mage, and we'll see how much that takes off or not. But it was just something no one was trying, and I think there's so much out there to try that I don't think this meta is solved right now, and I don't think it'll be solved when the Masters Tour happens. It's not going to be solved when they nerf after the Masters Tour, which seems likely. And I kind of feel like with the pace of balance changes these days, we rarely have solved metas anymore. Once they are, it's that way for sort of a week, maybe 2, before we get another patch. It feels like really only at the end of a cycle, when everyone's waiting on next expansion, that it feels solved to me. Because there's just, I don't know, something about how they've been designing cards recently. I just always feel like there's a ton of stuff to try.
I don't even. So that's interesting. You say that between expansions it feels maybe solved, because I think this last expansion, I know people get tired of waiting for the new cards, but this last expansion, between the rotation and the last month or so, I felt like the meta was in the best place it's ever been. And maybe we weren't innovating as much, but it felt like it was a really good, well balanced. We had 17 decks in tier 2.
And oh yeah, it's crazy.
It was so maybe solved is a weird word, but it definitely felt like there was so much you could do. And there were still people innovating in all kinds of things. So I'm kind of hoping that we can continue that. But so maybe the meta's not solved, but we can definitely I think we can all agree on that Blood Death Knight was a tyrant of the first week. So I know we can beat the deck, but can you beat the deck and also be viable against other decks in the meta right now?
I would say definitely yes.
So what would you suggest? What would you suggest to our listeners that are at wit's end with Death Knight, especially Blood Death Knight?
I mean, I think definitely follow Ahirun on Twitter. But just you have to think about how people are building and playing that deck. And the way I see people playing it, they'll get into a mode of just like clear, 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 when they should just be trying to kill you because they've got Mograine going. And you can take advantage of that. So I think as people sort of learn how to play against blood and sort of either just have greedier things, I don't think the best way is necessarily to just like jam all kinds of discovers. I've been working on a 30 card blood list, and it has Rag and Alex and just lots of damage. So I was facing an XL blood list, and being 40 cards means they're less consistent. They don't always have the removal. And I ETC'd for War Rider, and I could see that my opponent went wide. And I was like, oh, they have Sylvanas. They're going to use Sylvanas to take my War Rider. That's fine. I Mograine and hit them in the face for 6 and ignore their board. So they make a bunch of trades into the Mograine, but they can't kill it. They steal my War Rider, but I get to hit them for another 7 off Mograine, and I've got that going. So I hit them for 7 with Mograine, and I play my Soul Stealer and clear their board. And it's just persistent damage. I next set up Astalor by playing the 2 and 5 stage and Hematurge, and just keep on the pressure. And if you don't give them a break to actually use those discovers, because the way that they even out the inconsistency is they have all these greedy discovers, and they use those discovers to try and find answers when they haven't drawn them. But if they have to spend that mana to play a School Teacher, to play the new 5 mana 4/4 that discovers 2 spells, then that's time that they are looking for stuff to deal with your threats and not actually dealing with them. I think another example is like, I don't necessarily recommend this. This was an experiment, but just to prove a point, I have Myrmidons in my Pure Paladin because there's a lot of buff cards in that list for me. So that draws you a card when you play a buff spell on it. So I just played it out on curve. They asphyxiated to remove it because it was really scary. The following turn, I played Katori Lightblade with Hand of Adal. They didn't have an answer for that because they just used it. And then the next turn, I got to do the blood spell, I forget, +3/+3 Divine Shield on Katori, and it copies. And, they're just blown out of the water dead because they don't have the answers. Unlike Priest, which can destroy a bunch of big Divine Shield minions, Blood cannot just do that. They still, they have single target removal for big minions, but if you get a couple of them, they can't handle it. So if you can sort of snowball your advantages and sort of see the chinks in their armor, particularly in these inconsistent XL lists, I think you find ways to beat them. And then there's also just playing the greedier decks. Druid has managed to come around now with the combo of Mishmash Mosher and Eternia Maw, where you make it immune, and then it just clears the entire opposing board because it doesn't stop attacking until everything's dead. And similarly, if you Jailer and then play Mishmash Mosher, it's immune, so you just get that clear every turn. And I had games where they patchworked and blew up my Anubricon, so I couldn't do the full combo of, Anubricon with a bunch of armor, Tony to swap decks, and then Jailer destroy their deck. That's what you ideally want to do against, anyone, but especially a Blood DK. And I still was able to just go, okay, Jailer, you need Soul Stealer to clear this, or you're just going to die. And they weren't able to find it, or maybe they found one, but then couldn't clear the second board. And, they can't handle the immune minion. So there are ways to deal with it. Some of those are going to lose you other matchups. Pure Paladin, I think, tends to murder Druid because it's a snowball deck. So I expect that over time, we are going to end up in another one of those really wide open metas where you've got all kinds of things that have certain good matchups and certain bad matchups, and it just kind of takes a while to get there because people already knew how to build Death Knight decks.
And they didn't really lose any cards or change. Interesting. So a
Right.
couple things out of what you just said. One, we were talking about lead dancer before, and we said there's not really a lot to hand buff, but you were playing a buff paladin. So maybe there's a way there to. I was just thinking when you
That's
said
so much mana, though.
that. It is a lot of mana, so that's fair. But when you said that, you're like, I'm playing a buff paladin. I'm like, oh, but lead dancer. I want lead dancer to be good. Damn it, I'm with it. Okay,
I don't think that's going to be the way, though.
Okay, that's fair. But you did say, like, so you are a different breed of Hearthstone player. Let's admit that. You are not your typical Hearthstone player. So do we feel like outside of folks like you and Warshak and people that develop and Funky Monkey, do we feel like that Blood Death Knight is holding the meta back from developing outside of the outliers that can be creative?
I mean, it kind of depends what you mean by holding back. I think in any meta where there's something that's clearly powerful or even just popular, you're going to signal to people like, hey, if you can figure out something that consistently beats this thing, you're going to be rewarded for it. And so that will inherently be warping. It is good against certain kinds of decks, right? If you are doing stuff like Unholy Decay or, other sort of go wide board-based decks, you may struggle because Frost and Blood are generally pretty good against those. Outcast, Demon Hunter, right? Like, they will clear your board and gain a lot of life, and if you do not have something like a Frozen Touch to keep the pressure on, it's gonna go poorly. But if you are willing to kind of try other things, I think this is what's challenging, is a lot of people have a preferred play style. And so if your preferred play style is that thing that doesn't line up well, then it's tough. You have to figure something out. It's sometimes there's another kind of aggressive list that is able to have that strong matchup because it has some kind of X factor. Paladin can be that way with Divine Shields against Blood, but not always. I think Aggro Mage kind of does with Frozen Touch and spell damage. But if you are focused on one kind of play style that just doesn't line up to the popular list, it's going to be tough. For me, I actually struggle with the wide open metas because as a deck builder, I'm kind of a hunter. Like, I like having a target. So if I am building to beat specific things, then it helps me out for that thing to be popular because I get to see that matchup more, and I get to benefit from it more if I'm successful in building something that's good in that matchup. But with a wide open meta, it's tougher to experiment because you can't make your tech cards good against everything, and sometimes you face something and you're like, well, that wasn't useful because I have no idea what they were doing. The same reason I mentioned earlier, I don't like playing in casual trying to do experimental decks, because facing other experimental decks doesn't really help my purpose.
And that brings me to the other question I had. So you mentioned ETC, and ETC obviously stands for every tech card, right? So is ETC worth the cost? Because like what you're saying right there, like that sounds like he's the perfect card for you, given that like, well, this matchup, I have all these options now, but it also is a 4-mana tax on when people say, well, instead of paying that 4 mana, just play the good cards. What are your feelings on ETC as a card in this? Not necessarily, just in general as a rule. Like, what do you think about ETC as a card, as a concept?
Yeah, I would say if you do not have very many cards that are over 4 cost, ETC should not be in your deck. Right? It needs to be very much in the middle of your curve for it to kind of be worth it. So, like, something controlling, like a Blood Decay or a Control Priest, they can run ETC because, okay, 4-mana attacks for a little adaptability. What I like to do is ETC with maybe a Rivendare, because that gives you some inevitability against slower things. And then I go for a defensive option as well. Whether it's, in my 30-card Blood, I did a Corpse Explosion because I wasn't actually running those in the main deck. In my Rainbow, I would do a healing card. So there's, you could do Death Strike. There's the 3-mana 3/4 that heals all your stuff, all your side of the board for 6 at Mana Thirst 6. So that's what I sometimes do. It can be great out of ETC, especially if you're healing up other defensive cards. But does it go in everything? No, certainly not. Especially not in aggressive lists.
And that's also been the conversation around Fizzle. Since we're talking about specific, really specific text cards, specific tech cards. What are your thoughts on Fizzle? Because I know Zacho came across on the it's not worth it, but he's really picked up in popularity as far as almost a necessary in a mirror match. If you're going, so what are your thoughts on Fizzle?
Fizzle is weird and definitely much better than I anticipated. The fact that he's been seeing inclusion in so many different lists, for Relic DH, I'm not sure it's necessary. It's kind of hard to say. It is cool that the photograph does maintain discounts from the relics. So particularly in anything where you are potentially drawing your whole deck, the snapshot gets better because you can snapshot, shuffle in, and then draw it immediately. Especially in the case of Relic where you, like I said, keep those discounts. You can play the snapshot mid Sathino combo and, refill your hand and then just sort of keep going off and even get extra damage from it being a spell. In Mage, you can rewind to get extra copies of the snapshot, which is just a nightmare if there's solid alibi in there. But
I just threw it from my mouth.
yeah. And then in Warlock, my Fatigue deck that I'm working on, I have Fizzle in there, again, because my plan is to draw my whole deck anyway and take a bunch of Fatigue. I mean, not actually take the damage part, but get it ticking, and then use crescendos to finish them off. So Fizzle is great because there are only a few of the actual, Fatigue payoff cards. So if I can get extra copies of those, that's nice.
I suggested in Wicked's chat a little while ago that you could, in Rogue, Fizzle and then Shadow Step and then Fizzle your snapshot, and he threatened to ban me, which is fair. I'm not gonna argue with that. So is aggro a thing right now? Because I know that a lot of people feel like aggro isn't strong enough right now, but I've Shadow Priest is dear to my heart, and I feel like that kind of plays into aggro. Is aggro a thing right now, in your opinion?
I mean, I would say yes. Pure Paladin is still one of the popular decks, maybe not in Legend, really just because of bias, right? People don't like playing things that aren't able to swing the board back when you get into Legend, especially Top Legend. So there's a lot of bias there, but it's a powerful deck list, whether you want to harp on its playstyle or not. Shadow Priest, like you mentioned, can do quite well against Blood because they have to kill your stuff and it does a lot of damage. So that has been, pretty impressive in its comeback. And Outcast Demon Hunter as well can still just have those crazy games where they draw their whole deck. And I don't know if these fell out, but I definitely was seeing lists that still ran Sathino plus Rowdy Fan. Yeah, I'm just the Quillbore, the good one,
The fact that I know card names right now is scary to me because, I think I've actually remembered 7 or 8 card names this time, and that's new to me because I'm normally the guy with the thing.
But with the weapon, Outcast DH just, again, draws their whole deck, so you have a lot of fuel for a late game Sathino if you need that extra burst.
Is that a good deck? Because it came out gangbusters on day one, but it's kind of receded since then.
I mean, it's not as insane as people felt it was day one, and certainly, went down a little bit after the reversion. But I think it's still quite solid, and it's one of those that's almost an anti-aggro deck, because it is so good at taking the board with all its rush minions, and especially against Paladin, where Paladin thrives on having these divine shields that are obnoxious. Well, if you're summoning 3 1/1 rushers, you get to punch through those really easily.
And if you can stick a board and you have the legendary, it's over.
Oh yeah. Elveria is nuts. You just have, a couple minions stick, and you Helveria plus the security card for those rushers, and that's a bloodlust.
Oh, that's more than a bloodlust. Especially if you have you already have a board, and then you sometimes you have to clear the board or clear a couple spaces so you can play security, so you can get more. That is a difficult deck. There seems to be a lot of skill testing decks in this meta too. That it feels like we're not so. A complaint, and this is a little off topic too, but I guess it's not off topic. It's off what I've written down as topic. A lot of the complaints in Stormwind was that we were too packaged. We were too thematic around maybe a tribe or maybe a package. It doesn't feel like we're there this time around. It doesn't feel like you have this set of cards or set of this tribe that will get you a basic kind of win condition that goes into everything that you do with that class, and especially compared to last year at this time. Do you feel like we are now in a more skill testing meta than we have been at a 4-set meta? Because it feels like we are, in a way, to me at least.
I always feel like that's loaded, because there's skills in different kinds of decks, and aggressive decks just have all of those things packed into the early turns, so each little decision matters a ton. If I think of Secret Mage, it's a big deal of what secret I want to bluff and what secret I want to actually play. In something like Paladin, it's what minion do you buff, what removal are you playing around? And I think that kind of play of playing around stuff doesn't get as much acclaim, really, or as playing something like Miracle Rogue or Outcast Demon Hunter, or anything that just has a bunch of decisions, or control decks that inherently have more decisions because they intentionally push the game longer. But in terms of just the package element of what you were saying, I think all those things that were there last time are still there. Those packages, you can play Mech Paladin, you can play Mech Mage. They're pretty solid. There are a couple different ways you can do Mech Mage. They all have Frozen Touch. But it's more that, they've become flexible, right? The packages are not a whole deck autofill, not like quests. So if you look at Relic Demon Hunter, yes, it has all the relics, but that's 9 cards. And then you can choose how you want to build it out from there. You could go full spell and use the Scythe, and then you've got the Lifesteal 3/3s card, you've got Valderai Warband, you've got some really great cards that you can only have access to, in a good way, for being full spells. Or you can include minions so that you can discover more relic hits off of School Teacher, off of Nerubian Vizier. If you look at Mage, they got a package of cards in Light Show and Rewind and Volume Up, right? Clearly there was an intent there of, look, you Volume Up, you get extra copies of Light Show. You Rewind, you get extra copies of Light Show. But Volume Up and Rewind are just generally good flexible cards, right? You can get a copy of whatever you want. So Volume Up for Frozen Touch has been my thing. Certainly it's been for Solid Alibi for other people, or Rewind for Solid Alibi as well. there's a lot of ways you can take things, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we're going to have a control mage that just takes advantage of playing Alibi over and over and over again, and it's going to be a problem.
And they're already doing
I'll
that.
quit.
They're already doing that.
I'll quit.
Doc's smiling. Doc, do you like playing that deck?
No, I'll quit if that happens. That just is so awful as someone who is like an aggro mid-range player. Like, yeah, Ice Barrier was or Ice Block, forget the actual name, was worse enough. Solid Alibi is just like, well, you can try. Like,
And
I'll let you do a damage.
And I think that's where Solid Alibi and Blood Death Knight kind of hit the same point where it's just like you have a plan, you're playing against these decks, and they break out the Solid Alibi, they break out the I gain 10 health, they break out the Gnome Muncher, they break out the Blood. Do they really need Blood Boil too? Do they really need all those same things? And it's just like every time you're like, okay, you plan out your turn, and then they do these things, and you're like, oh, they just did these other things, and you're like, oh god, shoot me. You're like, ah. And I think that's why those are the most frustrating decks to play against, because it's just like these stall tactics aren't necessarily interactive as much as, like, there's nothing you can do about them. And I think that's where they get, well, no,
you
yes,
cannot go
there
wide.
are things you can do about them, sure. I know Edel's about to counter me, but like when they happen and you're like, okay, I set up my board, all I need to do is X, Y, or Z, and we're good. And then they play, like, you know, oh, they already played their 2 Blood Boils, they already played their 2 Gnome Munches, I'm good. And then they play the one that sucks up all the minions and gives them more corpses, and you're like, come on, really? Do you need all that? So I think that's where a lot of frustration with, and a lot of people get really frustrated with, like, Blood Death Knight in particular. Even if it's good or not good, it's kind of like Ticketus Warlock. It hits that nerve of, you did something that really just sucks, and I don't want to play against it. But
there's always going to be something that
Yeah.
some population of the Hearthstone player base is going to be upset about, because we all enjoy and hate on different styles of play. So
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm on Twitter, and usually it's very peaceful there. So in this meta, what in this new expansion, Edel, what are some cards that you really wanted to be good that aren't, and why is it a Necrotic Explosion?
oh my god, it is so very much Climactic Necrotic Explosion, or CNE. I misread that card the first time I looked at it, and I've just been crestfallen ever since I learned how it actually works. Because I wanted this card to spend all your corpses. All my rainbow decks, the only card that spends corpses is Defrost, which spends 2 corpses. So it's just not how I wanted to build Rainbow with this focus on corpse spending. I include all cards that, like, you know, do stuff right away. And the corpse spenders available to Rainbow are not that great. It's like Corpse Bride, Malignant Horror, and a few other things. but those are the big ones.
I contend that card's going to get nerfed down the line in, like, DNA. Yeah, not this expansion. In the 6-set meta, when we have a lot of corpse spenders that
I don't know,
that Rainbow wants to use, and then it becomes a super powerful card. Like, I think it's one of those ones that's just, it's not now, it's going to be a thing, but at some point it's just going to become too much.
I don't know, because likely there's going to be a lot of double rune cards down the line, because this was like the support. I mean, we'll see. The advantage to Rainbow is that you don't necessarily have to build specifically for it outside of something like a CNE, because as long as something is single rune, they can benefit. So if there's, you know, a bunch of good Death Rattle cards, maybe you do something with the 5-drop that copies a random Death Rattle and plays it. You know, there's a few other things that maybe will be better, but right now in single runes, there's not a ton of good corpse spenders, so that's why the focus has been on Malignant Horror, because it's the thing you can play where you just run that, and if it sticks around a while, it spends a whole lot of corpses for you. But I get so much more damage out of just having my curve be Banshee into No Muncher into, Patchwork or Syndergosa, and then Rag and Alex. Like, I just want to do damage. I don't need to mess around trying to spend corpses.
All right, are there any other cards that you really wish were better that you had high hopes for that just kind of haven't really panned out?
Oh, gosh. I'm sure there's something.
And we can leave it at CNE, but that's...
Yeah, I feel like I'd have to be looking at the cards and then something would come to mind.
Well, and it's fun thinking about it too. Though a lot of people have kind of complained that the new set has not been as impactful as a new set, especially a 4-set meta would be. That we're still kind of dealing with the same shells of existing decks. Like we're still playing Shadow Priest, we're still playing, Aggro Frost DK, which has nothing new. Do we feel like that this set has been impactful enough, or do we feel like we still need to kind of recede some of the existing cards to bring those to the front? And Doc, what are you gonna say? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, this ain't no Rastakon's Rumble. That's for sure. Like, the other shells exist, but there's still decks out there running the new cards that are pretty viable.
But you'll see a lot of decks that have maybe 4 new cards, and that's what people's complaints about.
I mean, but if you look at how many cards come out for each class, having 4 cards that are good that can be slotted into a deck, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not. I just think this set is very well balanced, generally speaking, and so it's not each archetype of the new things they're pushing have this really busted avenue for us to play.
But that's what people have been complaining about, and I'm not advocating for that. I'm having a lot of fun with the meta. I like it, but a lot of people say it's we're not playing a whole lot of new archetypes like we normally do in a 4-set meta. We're playing refined versions of the existing archetypes for the most part. DK hasn't changed much at all. Control Priest is still good. Shadow Priest is still good. Mage has a couple new archetypes that are middling. Hunter, who knows? Paladin, Pure Paladin, that's kind of the same archetype. There hasn't been a whole lot of new archetypes that have emerged from this set. And that's a lot of people feel the sameness of that. Because even if there's a couple new cards that make them more interesting, it's still Shadow Priest. It's still whatever. So that's been the complaint. So do we feel like those complaints are warranted? That's my question.
So what I find hilarious is that the way that we would have a bunch of all new stuff would be if it was heavily packaged, which was something that they complained about before. So yeah, the reason that we don't have a ton of new things in is because they didn't give us pre-built decks this time. That's just how it is. So there's a lot more things where we're taking some of the new cards. I mean, look, Outcast Demon Hunter didn't exist before, right? It had some of the older cards already, like the whenever you play an Outcast, get an Outcast. I guess that was around. And as well as the 5/5 Rush. Those didn't see any play, but now with the new cards, they were able to actually see play.
Well, to be fair, the rise of Outcast and DH is less about the new cards and more about the rotation. That was addition by subtraction.
It's both. I don't think the deck is possible without Glaive Tar and Helveria.
Sure.
But they put a bunch of stuff where there's sort of 2 different directions. You look at the Hunter things, there's the cares about spells stuff, and then there's the big stuff. Mage, you've got, cupping spells, and then potentially big spells. Cosmic Keyboard, I think, is a knockout card because, yes, you get a bigger minion if you're playing big spells, and so it looks like, oh, maybe you want a big spell thing. But if I Frozen Touch 3 times, I get 3 2/2s that let me Frozen Touch again.
Then you need a snapshot.
Well, usually I'm doing it and getting like 3/3s off the secrets, which makes it feel less bad to just play a secret because I'm getting a minion too. Or, on your turn where you volume upping, where normally that's a low tempo turn, but instead you still get a 4/4. So I just think it's unreasonable to expect that a new expansion in 4 set will both not have heavy packaging and give you all new decks to play all over the place. And the reality is, like, we've got a decent number of new stuff, and I think some things just have to be figured out. Imps obviously is an old thing, but people shifted away from curses and into the fatigue cards, right? And that's interesting. Yep.
I played 2 Curse Imp Warlocks today.
Well, I don't know. Maybe not everyone got the memo, but it's
even with like
pretty rough without Bran.
Even with like Pure Paladin, there's like some versions that I've come across where it's the get rid of the Divine Shield, create a minion.
Yeah.
Like, so it's changing like mechanics within existing decks, which helps it become not quite samey. So like there is new stuff to do and explore, but it's like splitting decks with stuff that we've seen, but it's just adding another level.
Well, like Pure Paladin, you can go heavy Divine Shields or heavy Silver Hands, right? And both of those can perform well in different ways.
I was actually gonna mention that card because that card I know people are very high on, the turn your Divine Shield into a 5/5, because they made parallels to the corporeal and incorporeal, however you say it. I have not seen that card played once. Not once.
It ended up just like not making the cut. I think because people are doing pure, and you really want to like absolutely be able to play it on 2. And I think to do that, you need to run Click Clocker, at which point you're no longer pure.
That's fair. And even if you do run the sacrifice of the reason why you play your Divine Shield minions is because you want the Divine Shield minions, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
Wow. So that's a lot. I honestly thought we'd be under an hour. We're not, which is fine. I've had a blast talking. Do we have any final thoughts on this current state of the meta? Doc, how about yourself?
I mean, there's things that feel bad that will be the things people remember, because people remember things that feel good or things that feel bad. Like I know I have complained a decent amount about how blood DK frustrates me, but I think that where we're at is a pretty good spot. Like tier 1 and tier 2 have quite a few decks in them, so it's not like there's like 3 decks you can play and be able to have success with. And like in your case, Edel, you can have a magnificent brain and come up with something that no one else has tried and have great success with it. So like the fun is there. The fun is ready for everyone to participate in. I just can't wait till the balance patch comes out and kind of tones down blood TK, hopefully, just because for me that's the big bad. But I think we're in a good spot overall.
But I think that what you're saying there is right on, Doc. Is like, so it doesn't matter the meta. Ed will find something that works. Like, she'll double boat you and she'll laugh about it. But but that's the problem too, is when you are trying to innovate and you're like, hey, it's week 1, I'm super excited. Oh, this Blood Death Knight has 60 health and it keeps clearing my board. That's where it's just like, it is what it is, but it's like that's where it kind of sucks you're like, oh, I guess I'm not gonna experiment now. It kind of takes something like that, feels like it takes away from the average person's ability to experiment, because you just kind of go, fine.
Depends what you're experimenting with.
This is true.
It could also change how you experiment to be like, okay, how can I do this thing but hedge my bets against blood DK?
Was that a druid pun?
I get where you're coming from.
That was a druid pun, right?
Yes.
Hedge my bets.
Yes, it was intentional.
Sure. All right, Edel, and do you have any final thoughts on this meta and the where we are right now and where we're looking towards?
Yeah, let it cook. It's just, like, we get so many balance patches these days that I think people have forgotten what it's like to just expect nothing for a while and wait for innovations, because people were calling for balance in the game. Like, the expansion was out for 2, maybe 3 days.
And then people were complaining about the nerfs we got and not understanding that
Yeah.
were very light, high confidence nerfs that were just meant to kind of align things. Like, why didn't we touch Hunter? Because that's not what we're doing right now.
Because they only hit old cards, right? That's what that was for. It's the same window that they hit Edel-Thrice and Theatar previously, where they were like, these are still seeing more play than we wanted. And these ones, maybe it felt different to people because they weren't neutrals, right? But I think it was still just a case of these are older cards that we could maybe have not shine as much. I don't necessarily think it was required. Maybe it would have been better, not to do it at all, just so that people don't have these kinds of expectations of things getting nerfed all the time. But I assume we're going to have a big patch post Masters Tour. That has been the pattern thus far, and we'll see where things go from there. But I expect people will be doing a lot of innovating in the next week still.
That's fair. All right, so let's wrap this up with one final question. If let's say Team 5 contacted you and said, we're only going to buff or nerf one card after Masters Tour, what's your buff or nerf?
Oh, God. Buff or nerf one card.
This is a tough one.
I'm just like, how do I make Light Show good? I don't know.
Light Show will see its day. It will.
Yeah, I hope so. Honestly, my instinct is just like Screaming Banshee's too good.
Screaming Banshee is
as much as I love the card's nuts.
Especially when combined with the weapon.
Yeah, well, and I don't even know how you balance it besides just making it easier to kill, right? Like 3/6 is a lot, but there's still the messed up turns where they play a Vampiric Blood and you've got a 3/6 and 2 5/5s. And you're like, what's happening? So, there's probably something that my heart would be more aligned with, but just in terms of first instinct, I feel like Screaming Banshee is too good.
Fair enough. Well, Doc, I don't know about you, but I think I'm getting a little full. Time for dessert, though. What do you think?
Yes, sir. So listeners, if you haven't already, please leave us a review. Just let us know what you think about the show. 5-star review, please. Just helps with visibility. Let us know what you like, what we're doing, and if you dislike anything, let us know where you think we could improve. It's just nice because there's a lot of podcasts that exist, and visibility when you're early, it's not a fun time and not the easiest way to not the easiest place to navigate. Review if y'all feel like it. Edelweiss, where can people find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at Sugoi Edelweiss, and you can find me on Twitch at Edelweiss TCG, I believe it is, because at the time I was also playing Magic.
How about yourself, Doc? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Twitch at Doc McButt. And Tito, how about yourself?
And you can find me at Tito Santana HS on both Twitter and Twitch. Edelweiss, do you have anybody you'd like to shout out tonight?
Oh, well, both of you for having me on. It's always a fun. I do like to talk, although my family is very confused because I don't always say much other times than growing up. But, and I want to coin concede also to my... Well, not coin concede. Shout out.
You can coin concede here. You're bringing it. It's your brand.
Old habits.
It's your bread and butter, as they say.
Yeah, to my brother-in-law, who is a tax attorney, and I ran into a problem, and he walked me through fixing it because I was freaking out.
How about yourself, Doc? Any shout out this week?
Yeah, so this one's gonna be kind of on the not so great, not so happy side. I want to shout out Bemi, because if any of you who listen haven't heard, unfortunately they have passed away. Now I know that our show is really about like the basics and fundamentals of Hearthstone, but if you don't know who they are, Bemi was like one of the biggest like figureheads in Hearthstone esports. They did everything they possibly could to make sure third-party events would exist and run for as long as it possibly could. I fortunately had the opportunity to meet Bemi at DreamHack Atlanta, and they recognized me like I didn't even see them. I just heard I was wearing my Swagoi jersey. I just heard someone say my name, and I turned around, and it's Bemi, and for some reason I forgot they worked for DreamHack when I was there. And they're like, hey, I'm busy right now, but I'll find you later. And they found me later, and we talked and took a couple pictures. And the Monster booth was having a dance contest. And those of you that know Bemi know that they loved to dance, and they were really good at it. So I got to see Bemi do the thing they loved in the environment that they loved so much. But yeah, shout out to Bemi for being who they were for Hearthstone esports.
Well said, Doc. And I would like to give a shout out to the Angry Chicken, who are having their final episode this week, 505. They have been on for a long, long time. We are here because TAC did it first. And I was listening to TAC before I had access to Hearthstone. I listened to them because I wanted to hear about this game, and the only input I had was the Angry Chicken, and I've been listening from the beginning. They have been such a joy over the years, and Jocelyn and Garrett and Dills and Hat and they've had so many great guests, and they've talked. And to be fair, like I always felt like TAC ended up being kind of like the podcast I could skip at times because they catered to like the average Hearthstone player, and then I found Coin Concede and you know Vicious Syndicate, and that was more along the lines of kind of where I felt like I was in an advanced state trying to learn more about the game, but TAC did it first, and TAC led the way, and they're just great, and it's going to be really sad. There's going to be lots of tears on Wednesday. I believe it's Wednesday when they have their final episode. And it is well earned. They have been such a pillar of the community for so long. So pour one out for them. And Edel, thank you for being on. Edel came on at the very last minute. We had a scheduling conflict that we had to adjust, and I know we were gonna have. We love having Edel on, and we hope to have her on many times because at least once in expansion we want to have her on, talk about the the current state of building decks and all that. But like the fact that you were able to fill in last minute, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Glad I was able to make it now that I'm done with all the hard stuff.
Yeah, and please don't forget, April 29th, 10 p.m., Edelweiss is going to battle Warshack in an off-meta battle on on Tito Santana HS. I hope to see you all there. And remember now, you have 2 extra hours per week of podcasts that you no longer have because the Angry Chicken is retiring. So you can fill that with bread and butter. Everybody can fill that with bread and butter. That's extra time. And we're even shorter than them usually. So just pass that along. But anyway, thank you for hanging out with us tonight, guys. I think we're toast. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Slide two brothers meet one another when they slide up to the mic. It's bread and butter with one another. Let's start up that recording light.